This is the easier-to-read version of 1984 by George Orwell, retold and narrated by Sarah Simpson. Part 3, Chapter 1. The first place the police took Winston was a normal jail. There was one big cell with 15 other men and women inside. Most of them were proles who had committed ordinary crimes like stealing, fighting, or being drunk in public. Only a few were political criminals like Winston. The proles didn't look afraid to be in jail. Many of them were laughing and joking around with the guards. They'd been to jail many times before, and they knew the routine. The political prisoners were more anxious. They sat quietly, looking nervous and afraid. The worst thing that would happen to the proles who had committed ordinary crimes would be a few months or years at a forced labor camp. The labor camps weren't so bad for the proles. The proles were given supervisor jobs in the camps. The political prisoners had to do the hard and dangerous work. If you had connections, which many of the regular prole prisoners did, you could easily get better food, cigarettes, alcohol, or any other forbidden item while you were in jail. The entire system was corrupt. Winston's stomach hurt. It was a combination of stress and hunger. Winston had no idea how long he had been in jail. The room didn't have any windows. He knew it had been at least 24 hours since he'd eaten, but it could be even more. While Winston sat on the floor thinking fearfully about what would happen to him, the police threw a huge drunk woman into the cell. She landed right on his lap. "Fucking bastards!" the woman screamed at the guards. She noticed Winston beneath her and smiled at him. "Sorry, dear," she said, moving off his lap to sit beside him. "I didn't mean to squish you. They threw me on top of you. What's your name?" "Smith," Winston said. "We have the same last name," she exclaimed. "Maybe I'm your mother." She could be my mother for all I know, Winston thought. If she thinks she could be my mother, that must mean she's had a bunch of children, and she doesn't know where they went. That seems pretty irresponsible. He pushed the thought out of his mind. Fear about what would come next take its place. Winston was surprised to notice how little he thought about Julia. In his mind, he loved her. In his mind, he told himself that he would never betray her, no matter what the police did to him. In his heart, he didn't feel anything at all. He was too preoccupied thinking about the pain and torture he knew would happen to him soon. He remembered what O'Brien said about how the Brotherhood would not help him, but he hoped they would find a way to sneak in a razor blade so he could kill himself if things got too bad. When he thought about cutting his own wrists, he felt sick to his stomach. He wasn't sure he'd be able to do it. He had a powerful desire to stay alive, no matter how horrible and painful that life became. After a while, it could have been 2 days or 5, he'd lost all track of time, the thought police took him to another jail. This jail was different from the first one. Winston knew he was probably somewhere inside the Ministry of Love, but he had no idea where in the building he was. He was in a big white room. A skinny, uncomfortable bench ran around the room against the walls. There was a large telescreen on each wall. A toilet with no seat sat in one corner. The lights were very bright, and it never turned off. Winston knew this was on purpose. The room was designed to keep him awake, and to keep him from knowing if it was day or night. This was a common, if terrible, form of torture. It was impossible to know how much time had gone by. It could be hours, or it could be days. Winston was so hungry. He thought he might have a tiny piece of bread in his pocket, but he was too scared to check. If he moved even a little bit, a member of the thought police shouted at him through the telescreen to sit still. Eventually, Winston heard the stomp of police boots coming to the door. His stomach turned. Were they coming to torture him? When they opened the door and shoved a man inside the cell, Winston was both startled and relieved. He recognized the man. His name was Ampleforth. He was a big man, but not muscular. He worked in the Ministry of Truth with Winston. Ampleforth worked in the poetry division, changing the words in poems to take out any references to ideas the party didn't like. "Ampleforth?" Winston asked. "What are you doing here? What did you do?" Winston waited for the police officer to yell at them to be quiet through the telescreen, but nothing happened. "The same thing as you," Ampleforth said. "There's really only one crime a member of the party can commit, isn't there?" "But what did you actually do?" Winston asked. "You always follow the rules. I can't imagine you doing or saying anything against the party." "There's only one thing I can think of," Ampleforth said. "I was revising a poem. One of the lines ended with God. I was supposed to take it out, but I didn't. It would have messed up the rhyme. I had to leave it. Now I'm here." After a while, it could have been 20 minutes or 4 hours for all Winston knew, a guard came and opened the door. He pointed at Ampleforth. You're going to room 101. Ampleforth left with the guard. Ampleforth looked nervous, but not terrified. Winston felt terrified for him. He didn't know what room 101 was, but he knew it must be bad. More time passed. The bright lights never shut off. Winston's stomach hurt from hunger. He heard the stomp of boots again. The door opened again. Another man was shoved inside the cell. Winston gasped. It was his neighbor, Parsons. The one with the 2 rotten little kids, the one who loved the party and was a true believer. Winston was shocked. What on earth could Parsons have possibly done wrong? "What did you do?" Winston asked. "You're the most loyal member of the party I know." "Thought crime," Parsons said, looking ashamed. "I did it without even knowing it. I did it in my sleep when I was dreaming. My little girl heard me talking in my sleep. I was saying, 'Down with Big Brother.' She went right to the thought police and told them the very next day. I'm proud of her. It's proof I raised her to do the right thing. When I go in front of the judge, I'm going to tell him thank you. I really am grateful I got caught before I did anything worse. Maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe they'll only put me in a forced labor camp for 5 or 10 years, since I've never done anything wrong before." Parsons grabbed his stomach. "Sorry," Parsons said, running over to the toilet in the corner. "It's the stress. It upsets my stomach and gives me diarrhea." Parsons pulled down his shorts and sat on the toilet. It seemed like Parsons was pooping for hours. Winston tried to look away and cover his eyes, but the police yelled at him through the telescreen that covering his face was not allowed. He was stuck just watching and listening. Afterwards, the toilet wouldn't flush, and the awful smell filled the room for hours. Finally, the guards came and took Parsons away. Other prisoners came and went. Winston was still not given any food, and his stomach continued to ache with hunger. He didn't know how many days it had been since he had eaten. When the guards told one woman she was being taken to room 101, she looked sick. Once again, Winston wondered what terrible thing happened in that room. For a while, it was just Winston and a man with a weak chin and teeth that stuck out. He reminded Winston of a big, friendly rat. The man looked frightened and didn't try to speak to Winston. The guards brought a third man into the room. He was so thin he looked like a skeleton. Even the bones in his face stuck out. He was that thin. Winston realized that the man was starving to death. The party was refusing to give the man food in order to torture him, and they were doing the same thing to Winston. That's when the rat-faced man stood up and walked over to the thin man. The rat-faced man pulled a small, dirty piece of bread out of his pocket and held it out to the thin man. The thin man looked more afraid of the piece of bread than he was of starving to death. He immediately put his hands behind his back, making it clear to any guard watching that he was not taking the bread, no matter how hungry he was. Winston wondered what the thought police had done to this man that would make him turn down a piece of bread when he was obviously starving. "Drop the bread!" shouted a guard through the telescreen. The rat-faced man dropped the bread. It fell to the floor. The door opened, and a guard came in holding a metal baton. The guard raised the baton and hit the rat-faced man in the head with it. The blow was so powerful that it knocked the man to the ground. Dark red blood ran from his nose and mouth. The man laid on the ground and whined. Then he slowly got up onto his hands and knees. He spit out his dentures. The denture had broken into 2 pieces. Fake teeth were very strong, nearly unbreakable. Winston couldn't imagine how hard the man had been hit if it broke something that strong. The door opened again, and another guard called out to the thin man, "Room 101." The man screamed. He dropped to the ground and put both hands around the metal leg of the bench. "No, please," the thin man cried. "Not room 101. Anything but room 101. I've told you everything. I swear I have. I'll confess. I'll confess to anything. Print something out. I'll sign it. I'll sign anything. Just don't take me back there." "Room 101, the guard repeated. "You can do anything else to me," the man cried. "Anything you want. You've been starving me for weeks. Just let me die. Just shoot me in the head. Make me do forced labor for 25 years. I don't care. Just not room 101. Is there another name you want me to give you? I'll say any name you want. I have a wife and 3 children. My youngest is only 6. You can cut their throats in front of me. I don't care. I'll watch you do it. Just not room 101. "Room 101, the guard repeated again. The thin man looked at Winston and the rat-faced man, begging them to help him with his eyes. They both looked away. The thin man was screaming. "Take him!" the thin man screamed, pointing at the rat-faced man, the same man who had tried to give him the bread. "He's the one who betrayed the party, not me. Take him!" The guards tried to drag the thin man away, but he held on to the leg of the bench and would not let go. One of the guards kicked the man's hand as hard as he could, breaking the man's fingers. Finally, he let go. They stood him up and dragged him away to room 101. More guards came and dragged the rat-faced man away, too. Winston didn't know where they took him. He hoped it wasn't to room 101. Winston was alone for hours. The piece of bread lay on the floor exactly where it fell. Winston wanted to pick it up and eat it, but he knew the consequences would be horrible if he did. The bench was hard. The floor was hard. His entire body hurt. He was exhausted. He was so hungry. Once in a while, he thought about Julia, but not as often as he felt he should. For all he knew, she could be in room 101 right now, being tortured. He thought, if I could save Julia from being in pain by agreeing to experience twice as much pain myself, would I do it? The answer was yes, he would. But he didn't think that because of any love or passion for Julia in his heart. He only said that because he knew it was what he was supposed to say, what he was supposed to feel. The truth was that he no longer actually felt anything for Julia. No love, no worry, no regret, nothing. Winston heard the stomp of boots outside the door again. This time when the door opened, O'Brien came in. "They got you too," Winston cried. "They got me a long time ago," O'Brien said sadly. That's when Winston realized that O'Brien had betrayed him. O'Brien had never been part of the Brotherhood. He wasn't trying to destroy the party. He was working for them, helping them find people like Winston, who wanted to see the end of Big Brother and the party. "Deep down you knew all along," O'Brien said. "Deep down you wanted to be caught. That's why you took so many risks." There was no time to think about O'Brien's betrayal. Right now, all Winston could think about was how to avoid being hit by the guard. The guard was holding up his metal baton. Panicked, Winston wondered where he would be hit. Then the baton cracked down hard on his elbow. Winston fell to his knees. The pain exploded in his elbow. How could one blow cause this much pain? The guard was laughing at Winston, amused by the look of surprise on his face. Winston thought back to Julia. He thought about how he had believed he would be willing to experience twice as much pain in order to save her from feeling pain. He didn't believe that anymore. The only thing that mattered was your own pain and avoiding it. It was easy to be a hero when you weren't being tortured. When you were in pain, it was impossible to be noble. It was impossible to care about anyone but yourself. It was impossible to be a hero.